Love is a Battlefield, Invincible, The Warrior, Better Be Good to Me, The Best are songs that if you were young and living through heartache to heartache during the 1980s, or even if you weren't born until decades later, chances are you know the words to every song written by the Hall of Fame songwriter Holly Knight. And in her book, I Am the Warrior, My Crazy Life Writing the Hits and Rocking the MTV Eighties. And she offers a very juicy and provocative look at her creative writing process of bringing her mega hits to life through the timeless vocals of artists such as Tina Turner, Pat Benatar, Patti Smyth, and even Rod Stewart and John Waite. How about Cheap Trick? And of course, Heart and Kiss, and the list and the hits just keep going and going. While Holly Knight's songs have appeared in movies from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, Thelma and Louise, 13 Going on 30, and one of my favorite movies, Dallas Buyers Club. And her songs have been licensed for popular TV shows including Schitt's Creek, Stranger Things, Saturday Night Live, and South Park. Well, by now, you should get the picture that her songs have been in your ears for the last 40 years. Well, in 2013, Holly was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to welcome the icon, the legend, the queen of songwriting, the mistress of the melody, the incomparable Holly Knight. Welcome to the show.
Wow, that was quite an intro. Thank you. I don't know if I can follow that if I'm worthy, but thank you for having me.
I think your catalog of songs, my goodness, mega hits. I don't even know if the word mega is even big enough for the songs that you have written that have literally just been embedded into our hearts and minds for many, many decades now. But I want to kind of step back a little bit because I understand that at the age of 11, your grandmother and your father bought you a Steinway piano for your birthday. You still have that piano?
I do. It's sitting right in my studio, and my relationship with that piano has probably lasted longer than any other human relationship. And that was my second piano because I started when I was 4 and I took classical for 10 years. And I had a little upright piano, or actually it was a spinet, which is somewhere in between. And my piano teacher said that I needed to get a better piano with better action so I could develop stronger muscles in my fingers. And that's when we went to the Steinway showroom, which is in my book, the whole experience, how they were so sweet. And they sat there all day while this arrogant little 11-year-old sort of walked around the showroom and played every piano in there. And then I came to the last one, and it was like, hello, soulmate. And still with me.
Well, what is it, what goes through your mind when you sit down to that very piano now?
We're one and the same. It's sort of like if you spent a lifetime riding a bike in tandem with someone in the back and you pedal together and we have a relationship. I mean, it's an entity. It's not a person, but it's very connected to me. And all the memories, I mean, I've written simply the best on that piano. And I studied classical on that piano and spilled drinks on that piano and things I can't say on the show on that piano.
Well, as I was reading your book, and your book is, well, it's very colorful, very insightful. And I love the whole songwriting process, and I love talking to songwriters, but you are literally one of the top, one of the biggest of all time when it comes to writing monster hits. But you legally changed your name to Holly Knight. Did the name change help you go from Bruce Wayne to Batman?
I think so. I think I was that person anyway. So when I changed it to that name, it was very comfortable, and it was sort of symbolic. I mean, I talk about it in the book as knighting myself, and it came to me in a dream because I was in a band, and in those days we were all trying to think of a name that was more of a stage name, and it came to me in a dream, and it just seemed so natural. After trying for weeks, months to come up with a name. I was born with Holly, so that was already my name. And once I woke up, I thought, that's it. That's the name. And I had it changed legally, probably within that 2-week period. And I never looked back. I never thought of myself as anybody else.
As I was reading your book, and ladies and gentlemen, her story is absolutely phenomenal. It is one of the best reads, one of the most fun times you'll ever have
Aw.
reading a book and learning. To me, there are more stories when it comes to music history and movie history, and it seems like you've kind of crossed both sides. But what I loved about you, Holly, was just as I'm reading and following along with your story and almost trying to put myself into your shoes, you had this gumption, this unction, this way about you that nothing stood in your way. And one of my favorite stories is when you were picked up on stage by the Beach Boys and you got to play keyboards. What was that like?
That was not premeditated at all, by the way. It just something compelled me to run to the front of the stage. I was there in the audience. And I just started miming, like playing a keyboard like this, like me up there, you know. And I don't I didn't think he was going to pull me up, and then he did. And the audience kind of pushed me up from behind. He pulled me up, and then he walked me over to a keyboard. And of all the songs they could have been playing, they were playing Good Vibrations. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I remember him yelling the chords into my ear, and I was sort of like very smugly, I was so tickled at what was going on. I said, I know the chords. Probably everybody knows the chords and the words to that song if they're a musician. But I played, and that was very cathartic, and it was an epiphany for me when I looked out into the audience, and I thought, this is where I need to be, because it's a different view up here than from in the audience. And because I was a performer anyway, it was very comfortable. It was very natural. And so at that point, I just wanted to be a rock star. Songwriting hadn't even come into it. That came when I joined my first band. But at that point, I just wanted to be a performer.
Yeah, and and you walk us through in your book about being in a band, dealing with all of the personalities, and
Mm,
there is a very
mm.
deep story just within the first, especially with Spider. And but you were at a studio when Kiss was there, and Gene Simmons asked you to play on their record. Tell us about that.
Well, we weren't complete strangers. We had the same manager, Bill Coyne. We had recently gone. I mean, he had been, for a while he'd been with Kiss. He was part of that whole image thing that created the image and the marketing, and everybody wanted to be managed by him, but he really liked us. And the reason that we even got his attention was because our drummer, Anton Fig, who later became the drummer on the Letterman show that David was always talking about, and he was on that show for 20 years. He ended up playing on one of the solo records for one of the Kiss members, which was Ace Frehley. Each member was doing a solo record, and I don't know if you remember, if you ever saw, but each cover matched the other ones. They had the same look to them. And after he played on that record, he got the attention of Kiss, and he actually ended up playing on two records and ghosting. So he played on Dynasty and the same record, Kiss Unmasked, that I played on. So we all kind of knew each other and already met. I knew Ace quite well. As you know, in the story, I talk about all the crazy partying that we ended up doing. I mean, the 80s were crazy that way. And it's all there in the book. And then I happened to be at the record plant one day when he walked out, and I knew they were in the studio. And he just looked at me and said, hey, we need keyboards on a track. Oh, do you want to come in and play? And I said, yeah. And then I just kind of said something stupid like, you mean now? And he goes, yes, now. And he opens the door for me and basically sort of shoved me in there. And I played on one song, and then he said, hang on a minute. And I thought I was just warming up. I didn't, they played it once and I played along with it. Somehow I didn't know, but they recorded it, and they were in the studio. I was in the main part. They were in the control room, and they said, can you come in here? And I said, oh God, they didn't like it. And my shot, I blew it, I didn't even get to do it yet. And he said, we love what you just played. We're done with that song. Can you stay and play on the whole record?
Well,
Couldn't believe it.
one of the things that I noticed, well, and in this story, um, and I guess you were really, really young in understanding how the music industry actually worked. Were you shocked that you didn't get credit on that album when Gene said, we have to keep up this persona to our fans?
I wasn't shocked. I actually was prepared because I knew that they had already done that with Anton, and he had been fine with that. I mean, he got paid well and he got to tell everybody he played on the record, and that was better than nothing, you know. So I was already aware of that, and he had explained to me some other day, you know, our image is really important. You know, we're a guy band, and that was the other thing, the fact that I was a woman, and they didn't care, which was amazing because they were known for being, you know, misogynist and heathenists. You know, they bragged about bedding thousands of women and taking Polaroids, and so for them to just go, hey, you fit the bill, you can do the job. We could care less if you're what a woman, a man, whatever. I thought that was pretty forward thinking of them. It gave me a level of respect that I hadn't had before, and I couldn't wait to go back and tell my band, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this! I just played on the whole Kiss record." And what was interesting was because I thought no one's going to believe this. When I received the checks, I Xeroxed them, and they say "Kiss" on them for services rendered on keyboards or something like that. And I saved those checks for 40 years, and they're in the book. I put them in the book because it's just not, I can't even believe I saved them for 40 years. What was I saving them for? Because years later, they were bragging about it. Because once I became well known as a songwriter, they were like, yeah, she played on my record. You know, it's kind of cute in a way. But
Well, what is that like to have someone like Kiss brag on you?
well, you should see what Gene said on the blurb on the back of my book. It's really charming. He goes, he brags that he knows me. It's ridiculous. But yeah, it's, you know, here it is 40 years later. I mean, we have so much history. We're still friends. You know, I dated, after that, I dated Paul Stanley, as you know, it's all in the book. And I had a lot of adventures and stories to tell. And so people kept saying, write a book. And I was like, okay, let me try it.
Yeah, and
That's
it
how
is
the book
a
happened.
it is a fabulous book, Holly.
Thank
One
you.
area of the book, or I should say, your story, you called Mike Chapman that you were leaving Spider.
Mhm.
His response to you set you free, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, I thought he was going to be angry at me because he was the president of the label that our band was signed to. And I thought he'd be upset because they had put a lot of money into the band. And I explained to him why I was leaving the band, which I won't go into now. You can read that in the book. But, well, you read about it in the book. But for those who haven't, I'll just tell you the details that you want to hear right now, which is he encouraged me to pursue songwriting. And he said, you know, you're a really good musician, but there's a lot of good musicians out there. There's a lot less great songwriters. And what I mean by great is they're the royalty of the business when they can write one hit after another. And I think that you can do that. We had already written one song together, which was Better Be Good to Me, and Spider recorded that on the second record. It became the second single for Tina Turner, about, I want to say a year later, when she did the Private Dancer record. So we already knew that we had chemistry. So he said to me, if I moved out to California, we could write together. And if he was producing a record, even if he wasn't the writer, and they needed to look for an outside tune, if they couldn't come up with it themselves, I would have a direct line to that record, which was great. He said, I'll introduce you to people, which he did. He was a great publisher, actually, in addition to being a great producer. And for those that don't really know who I'm talking about, it was Mike Chapman. And Mike Chapman was a very successful um, producer that had done all the Blondie records. He did The Knack with My Sharona. He did Hot Child in the City with Nick Gilder, who he introduced me to. And that ended up being, we wrote together for Patti Smyth for The Warrior. So a lot of things sort of led from being in the band, meeting Mike Chapman, leaving the band, and then aligning with Mike. And then I started writing with a lot of other people outside of him. And that's sort of the first part of the book. So I call the first part of the book sort of the film noir section, which is New York gritty. I'm from New York. And then when I get to California, it's like Fuji color. I call it Fuji color. And right around the time of Fuji color, because LA was so crazy and bright and blue skies, where New York is black and white, the MTV was born. And once MTV was born, that was the best thing that ever happened to me because I had so many different bands at the same time doing videos that were very popular. And so this book is focused on that MTV era, like from 1980 to 1990. So everything that happened afterwards, I just sort of put in the afterward. But I really wanted to focus on the MTV period because it was so special, and not a lot has been written about it from an insider's viewpoint, and it was such a crazy fun time. The 1990s, things started to change and get more serious, and we had, consequences for all the behavior we had in the 80s. But it wasn't as much fun.
Yeah, I'm a person that absolutely loves the music from the mid to late 70s. But the
Me too.
80s was well, it was elevated to the fact because of MTV. And I think we all know that there are probably some artists that would have never been famous if it wasn't
Mm,
for MTV.
very
But
true.
you and Mike wrote Love is a Battlefield for Pat Benatar.
Hmm.
What did you learn about letting a song go and have someone make it different than your original vision or version?
Well, I go into great detail in the book about that. Uh, it was hard, because I was new at this. It was hard. It's sort of like, when you write a song, before you let it out into the world, before you let everybody sort of give their opinion of it's a hit, it's not a hit, I love it, I'm not loving it, it's too pop, it's not pop enough, it's too long, it's not this, it's not, before you get all that stuff, it's safe. It's your little baby in your home and you're nurturing it and you're loving it. And then the moment of truth comes where you have to put it out into the world and let people start to judge it or love it or whatever. And it's sort of like putting a baby up for adoption. You know that it needs to find a home, but you hope like hell that they're not going to screw it up. You know?
Well,
And
yeah, and you were surprised how when Neil sent the song back, I think you and Mike just basically looked at each other like, "What is this?"
yeah, we did. We didn't like it at all when we first heard it. And we were just trying to process like why he changed it. He didn't change the song itself. All the elements were there. The lyrics, the music. He changed the production. So we gave him a song. He likes to say that it was a ballad, but it was not a ballad. It was a mid-tempo eighth note kind of feel, which is sort of my forte, if you will, or was back then. And it was like meat and potatoes, like a group, like an anthemic epic song, like Game of Thrones or something. And what we got back was a dance track, and it was faster, and it sort of had a lot of synthesizers and noises in it that we hated. Um, but we still could tell it was going to be a hit, and it had Pat's vocal, which is the most important thing. Her vocal was magnificent. And we learned to love it as it started going up the charts. And we loved it a little more and a little more. And so now, now it's quintessentially an 80s tune. Someone said to me in an interview the other day, I was surprised when I heard that because it wasn't as rock as some of the things Pat Benatar had been known for. And I agreed with that. We gave them a rock track, because she was such a great rock singer. And that's why it was kind of a shock. But I will say that more times than not, we like the productions. I like the productions. There's even been one or two where I actually like their version more than the demo because the demos were always quite simple, And for instance, when John Waite did Change, I actually liked his version more than the version I did with Spider, which is who I originally wrote it for. So
Yeah, and
all the above.
and I love that song Change.
Mm,
But with
thank
the
you.
80s and literally the MTV era when MTV literally played music videos and we would watch them for hours and hours and things like Live Aid and the list just goes on and on. What do you think your songwriting career would have been like if MTV never existed?
Well, you could ask that about everybody, really, because
Yeah.
it took everything to a new level. And a lot of people that maybe, I think what happened was it in the beginning was good, but as it evolved, it sort of shifted where almost like the video and the visual was more important than the content of the music. People started worrying more about how they looked. Things were getting choreographed, and there were a lot of distractions to sell the song, whereas before it was always about the music. So in that way, it was good and it was bad. But for me, it was just nothing but good because I would either get asked by an artist to write a song for them, or we would write something together. And then I didn't have to wait a super long time for the song to come out, and they would make the video in a few days, and boom, it would be out there. And if it was a video that people liked and it went into heavy rotation, it could sit there for like 6 months, you know. And then I think MTV got sort of fascinated with the fact that behind this sort of certain style of song was a woman, which was an anomaly in the business, you know. And not only because I was a woman, but the fact that they were even talking about the songwriter, because most people think that the band writes the music, you know, to this day. People think that Tina Turner wrote the best. And, you know, and a lot of times the artists like it that way. They like to perpetuate the myth, if you will, and let people think that they wrote the song. So I think MTV found that fascinating. And I don't see what the shame in it. I could never figure that out. It's like if you're an actor, it doesn't mean you have to be a great screenwriter. The screenwriter writes something that they give to the actor, and then the actor portrays it. You know, sometimes they do both, and that's great. But there's nothing wrong with not doing it. And I think there was a great stigma at that time with the bands that were ashamed to say they couldn't come up with their own music. But the fact is, a lot of times they couldn't. Even if they had had a magnificent hit, there were a lot of bands that had hits. That's their best stuff, in my opinion, was their earlier work. But they had run out of steam and they wanted to still have a career. So if they needed to go outside the band to write with someone, to me, it wasn't a big deal because they were going to let people think they wrote it anyway. So I just figured I was there to help, you know?
Yeah, and you had an interesting, well, time, especially uh, when Aerosmith's song "Ragdoll," which was originally titled "Ragtime," and
Hmm.
that was an interesting time for you.
Yeah, well, specifically, you mean as a songwriter or as a person?
Well, taking someone else's song and making changes
Oh,
to
I
it.
see what you mean. Yeah, that was a really unusual circumstance. And I don't like to write like that, but I agreed to because I wanted to work with Aerosmith. But they had a song that was pretty much finished, and their A&R guy, John Collardner, they'd signed a new deal with Geffen Records. He had a little bit more control because they'd just stopped doing all these drugs. They had a new record deal, and he had a lot of say on like, look, if you want a second shot, because they were almost over at that point, if you want a second shot, you're going to listen to me. So here's what I suggest. And he put them together with a few people, not a lot, but the few people that were getting put together with the bands, we were all kind of like, we all knew each other. Sometimes we wrote together when we weren't busy competing with each other. We were friends. Some of them we weren't friends with, and some of them are still really good friends of mine, you know? Like there was Desmond Child and Billy Steinberg. Those were two people that were kind of satelliting around the same records as I was. Um, and as I wrote in the book, I was the anomaly at the time. I was the only woman doing it. But because I had been in a band myself, and because I was a serious uh, musician, I kind of understood the whole rock thing, and that's what made it easy for me to sort of blend in with them when I would write with them. And I would try and write something that sounded like something they would have written on a good day, or when they were younger. That was the part that I really tried to hone in on. But in this case, I was just sort of brought in to tighten the screw and turn a song that was an album track into a hit. And when he sent me the track, the first thing I said was, is the band okay with that? Is Steven okay with that? He said, oh yeah, I talked to him. He's going to call you. He's fine. He understands why this needs to happen, and he's fine with it, and he's curious. So then Steven called me up, and we talked for 2 weeks every day. It was just one of those magical periods where you happen to have some time. And I thought, this will never happen again, because if this record is big, he's going to be out of here and he's going to just get bigger and bigger. And, that time that we had together with those phone calls and stuff it was really sweet and magical. And then I flew up to Vancouver, and I really didn't want to change the song that much. I thought the song was great. I thought the track was great. But by the time I finished rewriting, some of the lyrics with him and the title, he was ready to go cut it. And I was there when he cut the vocal, which was pretty cool.
Yeah,
And then
and
it
the
gets
song,
racy from there, which I can't really talk about. But
right? And the song "Ragdoll" ended up being a huge hit for Aerosmith, and Basically, I mean, brought them back. But
Yeah.
in the 80s, if I was to pick right off the top of my head, mega hit songwriters for during the 80s, it would be you, Desmond Child, Elton John, and Bernie Taupin. To me, I think that is the top three when it came to the 80s because my gosh, I mean, I know the songs. I've seen your list. I've seen Desmond's list, and of course, we all know Elton and Bernie. My gosh, I mean, the '80s, y'all ruled the '80s.
And I worked with Bernie and Desmond. I worked with both of them. In fact, when I was first in Spider, Desmond's band, which was Desmond Child and Rouge, used to open up for my band Spider. That's how I first met him. And neither one of us knew, well, I can't speak for him, but neither one of us was writing. We were trying to be, the band, the act at the time. And it's sort of funny how we both went in that direction at the same time.
Yeah. Now I've noticed that you stated in your book that you still have unrecorded songs sitting on ice. Have you ever thought of recording them yourself and putting out a solo record? Also, and I'm going to add to this question to you because have you ever thought of recording a songwriter's collection of all of the mega hits you've written with you singing them in the way that you envisioned them the first time?
Well, here's the thing. I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses. And if I was the sort of singer that could sing, I've worked with some of the best. So that's where the bar is. So for me to sing like Lou Gramm or Steven Tyler or Ann Wilson, I can't do that. So if I could do that, I would have been the performer. So I knew that my strength was the writing, and I'm just fine with that. I kind of like the idea of being behind the scenes. And what's ironic is here it is now I have a book out, and so I'm having to do the interviews and all the things that I was running away from, because then you have to start thinking about other things like how you're coming across, if you sound intelligent, all that stuff. So I've just resolved myself that, well, you have to do that if you want people to know about your book. But as
Well,
far as singing, I
yeah.
don't consider myself a great singer. That being said, I've sung, for instance, when I wrote Love Touch for Rod Stewart, I sung all the backups on that. In fact, I sung the backups before he asked me to sing the backups before he would sing the vocal. I've stood 2 inches away from Tina Turner and sung on a song I wrote called When We're Living because they asked me to. They said, I love it. Well, you sound on the demo. Come in. I want you to sing. So I never even really thought of myself as a singer. But I guess I was good enough that I was able to sing with these mega stars, But as far as lead singing, no, I don't really like doing that because, like I said, I don't consider myself to be that great a singer.
Well,
But I am doing new material all the time, and I'm producing a new band right now that I helped put together, which is called Lick Rush, and it's a band all of virtuoso women. Because we haven't seen a lot of all female bands. I mean, it's a shame that we have to label it like female, but the truth is there still are no monster commercially successful bands filled with women that are gorgeous and could do it all, and play. The guitarist, for instance, is a virtuoso player. She lives in Germany. We flew her over to record with her, and she's a protege of Steve Vai, if you know who he is. So the
I've
band is
interviewed
like
Steve
that.
twice.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, he's a friend of mine. He's a sweetheart as well. And the lead singer is Lena Hall, who won a Tony for Hedwig and the Angry Inch. She starred on a show called Snowpiercer, and she's an amazing rock singer. In fact, if anybody happens to listen before the 19th, I'm doing a show in New York City, if you happen to be in that area, at the Cunning Room. And it's basically a book release party where I'm reading some excerpts from the book. And Lena will be singing, as will Patti Smyth, who is the OG singer of The Warrior. And so that ought to be fun. And I'll be signing books and selling them at a discount. But yeah, Lena's terrific. So that's one of my projects. I have lots of things that I do, but I don't wake up every day now. Oh, I have to write a song. I have many interests. So
Well, that's awesome.
And
Well,
I'm curious to see what happens after this book has been out for a little bit, because I'm getting a lot of questions about other projects that would sort of come out of this, which is exciting.
yeah, and I would expect that to actually happen because I am so glad you decided to write the book, to write
Thank
your
you.
story. And but let's talk about The Warrior.
Okay.
So with Nick Glider, so Mike Chapman, which I found this
Nick
extremely
Gilder.
interesting. Yeah, you wrote it with Nick
Gil
Glider, but Mike
Gilder.
Chapman wasn't all that thrilled the day he listened, but then he wanted to hear it again and knew it was a hit. Now, I know people can be mentally somewhere else when they first hear
Hmm.
a demo or and then pass on it. Someone can hear the same song and it's a hit to them. So how frustrating was that? How frustrating has that been in your career when people would hear something the first time and just kind of like, nah, not interested, and you knew in your heart that they needed this song?
But that happens all the time. I mean, welcome to my world. That happens all the time. I can't tell you how many songs I have in my so-called vault that have not been cut, that are amazing tunes. I think some of my best work. So that's part of being a songwriter, because it has to be a good fit. And you don't know, like you said, on any given day, someone could be distracted because they lost a ton of money in the stock market, or they woke up and their back was killing them. So that actually comes into play. But yeah, when Mike heard the song and he said, yeah, it's okay, I was very disappointed because not every song back then did I think was a hit, but I knew this one was a really good one. And he'd asked me to write something for Patty. And I was just trying to think of, like, what does she mean to me? And so I wanted to write an empowering song because she was such a strong, feisty little, she was full of piss and vinegar, and I loved that. So I wanted to write something that was just sort of outside the box, but really strong for a woman. And Nick was actually okay that Mike didn't hear it as a hit because he wanted to keep it for himself. Nick Gilder had a hit called Hot Child in the City that he had done with Mike Chapman a few years earlier. And he wanted to keep it for himself, but Mike then decided to play hardball once he decided it was a hit, because I think a week went by and he called me up and he said, this song's a hit and I'm cutting it. And I thought, this is the same person a week ago that said, you know.
Well, I've noticed that with some of your songs, there is a theme of having a sound of an anthem. And, I Am the Warrior is one of those. In a way, even The Best comes across with that powerful anthem type of
Mhm.
vibe that hits all of us, and we want to sing it. And what's it like for you to write a song for an artist, but it ends up being their signature?
What's not to love? I mean, and especially with a name like The Best, how do you top that? It's taken a life of its own over the years. So when it first came out, it was sort of a hit. I mean, I was spoiled at this point. So I think it went to number 16, which to me was a failure, if it wasn't in the top five. Nowadays it's different. It's just so much harder. There's so much more records and material out there that even 16 is very respectable. And it went to number one in like other parts of the world, but it was really over decades of building up and spreading its tentacles around the world that it became this sort of highly licensed monster of a tune. And Tina has been, quoted as saying that she'd like to be remembered by that particular song because it's positive. We all have learned of her story and everything, and she doesn't want to be a victim. So to be able to sing something positive for her is joyous, and I think that's what everybody feels when they sing that. It's like one of those songs that you feel, you can't help but just feel wonderful when you sing it. you know
Yeah,
Whatever
and
you're singing it about.
yeah,
That's
and in your book, and I want to quote a sentence in your book based on the song "The Best," and you wrote, "The chords moved while the bass line pedaled on the same note, creating tension, the building up of something." And this was in reference to you writing the best. Um, and then you said, years later, it dawned on me that was sort of a signature of mine. So it took you that
Right.
long to realize that you had this special vibe, your own signature that would be in your songs.
It had to be pointed out to me a few times. When I was younger, I would say probably I was probably in my 20s, and I was sort of really having this big surge of success. What was so amazing was it was happening all at once. It wasn't just like, oh, I had a hit with this. I had a hit like here and then here and then here. Like one of those, what do they call those Venn diagram things? They were all sort of connected. Um, but this one interviewer said to me, how come all your songs are about fighting? I'm really interested to know about that. And I looked at him, I said, my songs aren't all about fighting. Some of them have those kinds of titles, but he said, no, it's not a bad thing. It's really compelling. I want to know more about it. I
Yeah.
didn't really know how to answer it because I hadn't realized it. So when I went home, I looked up some songs, The Warrior, Invincible, Better Be Good to Me, um, Love is Battlefield. And I thought, my God, he's right. He's absolutely right. How would I miss that? Because I was doing it on sort of autopilot. It was a big part of, you've read the book, so if you knew my beginnings, it would make sense. Things
Yes.
people, their
And
characters get formed in their first 10 years. It's the blueprint for the rest of their life. And I came from a difficult, a very sort of educated and affluent family, but I had an abusive mother, and she was physically abusive. I don't really talk too much about it in the book. I just sort of give one example and move on. And I only share it so that you know who I am. And I'm honest about it. It's a pretty raw passage in the book. But I also said I have come to realize that a lot of women I know that are successful women, they all had abusive mothers. It was like a thing back then. And I said, I almost feel cliche even mentioning it because everybody else I know that has a book that's been out there that's a lot, not all of them, but quite a few of them. If they were lucky, they had a really nurturing home. But if not, they have the same stories. And I think what it's done for all of us, it's made us fighters and survivors. And as I say in the book, survivors always have the best stories. So going back to the thing about writing about fighting, I realized I'm not writing about fighting with people. I'm writing about fighting for something. So all of a sudden I realized I've got this last name, Knight, which I stumbled on. And I'm writing about the things that I think I deserve in my voice and want. And I think that's where I tapped into most especially women and empowerment without meaning to. It wasn't like I had this whole thing mapped out. It was just kind of unfolded organically.
yeah,
Um,
and I agree with
yeah.
that because, reading your book, um, it, and ladies and gentlemen, you have to realize when you read a book, just don't read the surface, read it and feel it. Get into the
Thank you
emotion
so
of
much for saying that.
seriously, because that's how we learn about others, and that's how we appreciate other people and appreciate their story, appreciate where they're coming from. So Holly, as I was reading your book, I noticed something within the pages that went beyond your life, your songwriting, all the huge hit songs. I noticed that the little girl inside you is still alive and in awe of every moment during your magical climb to the top of rock music history. What is that little girl saying to you today?
I had a moment where I was in a hotel room. I had gone to London to work with Tina Turner, and I'd never met her before. So they put me up in this beautiful hotel, and I was lying there and saying, how did I arrive at this particular moment? I mean, I'm a songwriter, and here I am. I've been flown to London first class to work with the biggest artist on the planet. At the time she was exploding. And I thought, I wish I could go back there and tell that little girl that was so frightened, just stay put, because in about 20 years, you're going to have the most amazing opportunities in life. And all these things that you're going through, they're gifts. Because, adversity is a gift because it makes you want to do better and rise above and create greatness. The other stuff is like eating ice cream. Oh, this is good. This is so great. It's like going to Hawaii on a vacation, but it's the adversary moments that really are the ones, that the term, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is very true. you know.
Yeah.
I like to keep that childlike innocence. I don't even know if it's I like to. It's just who I am. I'm sort of like a nut. I'm hard on the outside sometimes, but soft and yummy on the inside, you know?
You said it. You literally said it because when I was reading your book and thinking about all the things that you've done, the things how you reached out, you know there were steps of faith, but then there was fate, all mixed together. And I was picturing this woman that was she's confident, but there is this fragileness inside. And I'm not going to call it an insecurity. We all have an insecurity. Not that we write it down on pages, but there's a confidence, but then there was something else. And like I said, it's the little girl inside of you. And I also noticed how appreciative you were when, if it was an artist you got to meet, if it was an artist that you got to write with, you wrote with Rod Stewart, John Bon Jovi. My gosh, the list just goes on with your storied career. Um, am I getting that right?
Yeah, I never stopped being a fan, you know? Uh, and because I appreciated who they were and how they influenced me, and the fact that I was now older and getting to work with them, I felt honored, you know. That's not to say it was that way with everybody. And when people were like, you know, being assholes to me, I had no problem just speaking up at that point. I was always sort of very, to this day, you know, people know that I'm from New York, even though I've lived in California for 25 years, because I always get this. You're so honest, you're so direct. If you don't like something, you don't say it in a mean way, but you basically find a way to say it where you're standing up for yourself. Because I started at a time when I never stood up for myself. In fact, you know, the book is dedicated, my dedication reads, um, to anybody who's ever had a dream and was told no. This is for you. Because that was me. And once you take control of your own life and you own it, um, nobody can steer you and say like it can affect you. I will say though, there's still a vulnerable, soft side of me because a few years ago, I had thought about the idea of writing a book, and I submitted it to an attorney who represented a lot of literary authors and had connections with book publishing houses, you know. So she read it and she sent it back to me. She said, you know, I think you write really well, but you're not a household name and I won't be able to get you a deal. And that kind of not devastated, it almost pissed me off because it's
She's
like,
an idiot.
you know, I'm in the Songwriting Hall of Fame. Like, how dare you talk to me like that? And here's the stupid part. I listened to her. So for a year and a half, I did not write the book. I thought, well, that dream's down the toilet. And here I am, like an older woman, listening to someone's opinion. So that's why it's so important to make that dedication, because had I listened to her, we wouldn't be talking right now, and I wouldn't have this book out that I'm getting such a positive response and the reviews and everything, and not just from women. I mean, I'm tickled about the fact that, you know, I did write it from a woman's perspective because I'm a woman, and I knew that women would resonate with it and be turned on by it. You know, like, wow, you were living the dream. I could live my dream. You know, but men are loving it, like, you know, like you, and even
Oh,
my rock star
I love the
friends.
book. I mean, I literally I have pages of notes that I
Oh
wrote
wow.
from your book. And I mean, as I'm reading along, I'm like, oh my gosh, she wrote that song. I mean, it's like you wrote Never for Heart. Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
I mean, that was the epitome of the 1980s. The hair, the guitars, the glittery
The
clothes, the
shoulder
music.
pads.
Oh my gosh. And still, it was Nancy that sang lead. That was the biggest shocker. Of course, we all knew that, but by reading your story about it and becoming great friends with the Wilson sisters,
Hmm.
you know, wow. And I like the fact that you being a woman and during that time being nothing but a man's world when it came to songwriting. And my gosh, when you got inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, you were what, one of only what, 16 women that
Correct.
were
Out of
in the Hall of Fame at
400.
that time?
Yeah. And in fact, even with the women, most of them were performers. Most of them were people like Joni Mitchell, or there were very few. There were maybe two or three other women that wrote for a living, and they weren't rock writers either. I was the only one that sort of infiltrated those camps. And because they were all bad boys, and people were like, "God, how did you survive it? What was that like?" I remember I wrote about this in the book. If you remember this part where I was working with Bon Jovi, and we were all in a hotel room, and they had a big suite or whatever. It wasn't like I was in their bedroom, not those anyway. But I just remember I was standing next to John and Richie Sambora, and Sam Kinison, the comedian, the late comedian, was there. And then MTV was always on in the background. Well, it was on in their room too. And then their video came on. And they're standing in their room singing along with their video. And I'm going, this is crazy. This is like, I feel like I'm on the other side of the looking glass, you know. And I was quite comfortable with guys. Like I said, I was a tomboy. I was from New York. I had been in bands. So every time that a band would kind of apologize for the behavior, I'd look at them like, this is not my first rodeo. Okay, so you don't need to.
Well, you
to go through.
wrote, yeah, and you wrote with one of the most powerful women in music, Tina Turner. You literally wrote her legacy. I mean, she will always be remembered for the best, and this song is considered your crown jewel. Are you still surprised by that?
Well, first of all, she's not a writer. I mean, she did write one song in Ike's band, which was Nat Bush City Limits. She probably wrote the lyrics to that because that's kind of very personal. That's where she's from. I wrote the song with Mike Chapman. She was my muse. Like, she cut 9 of my songs, and every time a new album would happen, it's like I'd go to her with songs, or she would call me. And what was interesting, it's in the book, but as I say, the best was not written for her, but it was meant for her. So it took this journey before it actually got to her, to the point where another artist, Bonnie Tyler, cut the song, and it didn't really do much. And then someone from my publishing company sent it to Tina, which was strange because usually I sent things myself to her, but I hadn't really thought about her as the person that sang that song. Which is, again, it's silly because I thought, well, it's already been cut by someone else and it's been recent. Why would she want to cut it? It's just, the whole story is strange how it got to her. It wasn't even written for Bonnie Tyler. It was written for someone else that I had a crush on, for a guy. Which I'm not going to tell the listeners, because I want you to read the book because it's a good story.
Exactly, because, yeah. And I'm glad you said that, Holly, because, ladies and gentlemen, there are many, many more surprises. There's no way that I can sit here with Holly and cover her entire book. There are stories upon stories. There are stories inside of stories. I mean, this should be a mini series.
Well, it may be
on Netflix, because wow,
limited mini series.
yeah, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent, right?
There are no innocent except maybe me in the book, and even that's questionable.
Well, in your book, and I love this, how you wrote this, that in your book, the song "The Best," like you had said, wrapped up the 1980s. And I love the way that you wrote it. And you said, it was the end of the 80s when we wrote it, the last of the feel-good times on many levels, the last of excess and partying, the last of blind innocence, and a certain level of escapism and freedom. So, Holly Knight, what is next for the queen of songwriting?
And by the way, I never stopped writing after that, and I've had an incredible resurgence. I mean, 80s music right now is just so popular because it goes along with these 80s sort of theme shows like Glow or Stranger Things. I just got a cover with the song Obsession for American Horror Story for the new season. And it's also, Obsession is in a movie called Cocaine Bear. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's much anticipated, harrowing movie, harrowing story. So Obsession seemed to work with that. If you could guess just from the title, and so I have ideas for another book, which would be sort of more focused on songwriting because I have done some master classes and I love teaching. I love the idea of passing it on to the next. It's like I had my shot. Let me pass what I know on to the next generation, you know? And so I want to have a book that has things on how-tos for songwriting. And they're not things that I was taught or was even, as I said before, aware of when I was doing. But now that I've been able to teach a few master classes, I can explain to people what's a copywriter. One of the most interesting things I've noticed with my students is they don't know what arrangements are. And arrangements to me are sort of the center point of writing a great song. You know, so you have a verse and you have a chorus, maybe you have a bridge, and the question is why? What does each part accomplish? And if it's not accomplishing anything, it shouldn't be there. Because a lot of people write songs and they don't write choruses, you know, and it's like without the chorus, you don't really have a song, you know, unless it's an instrumental, of course. But even instrumentally, you should have the hooks and it should be easy to tell this is the chorus, you know. So I want to do that with photos. I'm really into photography. I'm going to do photography exhibits. So I'm into very sort of fine art photography, black and white. I travel around the world, or I did until the pandemic happened. So like everybody else, I'm looking forward to doing that. And yeah, there could be a documentary coming out of this. There could be, yeah, a lot of things. And I'm glad to be one of the people to let people know about that special time. There hasn't been much documentation or talk about MTV, and the younger generation didn't even realize what it was. You know, some of them don't even know what a VJ is. You know, they've gone on to TikTok and social media, and I think everybody just needs to slow down. The other thing that I love about my book is, and people are telling me this as well, is it's a fun read. It's not like hard work. And in fact, I wrote 100 pages more than what ended up in the book. And I had a really good editor who, his name is Jacob Hay from my publishers, who was brilliant. And he kept taking things out and saying, no, make it so interesting. It's that idea of leave the party while it's still good. So it's not like it says a bunch of stuff that happened to me and then it just starts to meander and it gets more like a Wikipedia read instead of something fun and juicy, you know?
Yeah, and the book is fun. The book is, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's enlightening, it's educational, informative, and many of you who watch my show or you're listening to the replays online, ladies and gentlemen, many of you contact me because you're a musician, you're a songwriter, and you need to be inspired. And you want to be inspired, you got to be inspired by the best. And no pun intended, but Holly Knight is the best. She wrote the best. This is a book you need to read to ignite your own dream. You know, you need to pour the gasoline on the fire. And we all have that fire burning inside of us. And for those of you who are in the music industry or in music and love it and dream of making it big, well, we're not here to extinguish that dream. We want to fuel that dream. And Holly Knight's book, I Am the Warrior, is one of those. So right now, I want you to go to hollyknight.com for more information. And if you are a music lover or a lover of music history, you have to get Holly's brand new book, I Am the Warrior, My Crazy Life, Writing the Hits and Rocking the MTV 80s. And thank you, Holly, for your time today.
Thank you so much. Also, I just want to tell you, there's a lot of great, I don't know if you can see this here, photos of the people. A lot of fun, like Tina Turner, Rod Stewart, Don Johnson, Bon Jovi, Steven Tyler, moi. Just like lots of pages. Patti Smyth, another one. This is when Tina did my hair in Germany. She wanted to do my hair one night.
Well, you know,
and I also wanted to mention that
yes.
I did the audiobook, and that's out. So that's on Audible. I narrated it. And what's really cool about the audio version is that there are never before heard demos of some of my biggest songs, like The Best and Love is a Battlefield and The Warrior. So that's got a little extra bonus.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, again, you go to hollyknight.com, the book, buy it. You will You will be amazed. And I can just add adjective upon adjective because I love Holly's book. I love music
Thank
history.
you so much.
And it's been an absolute honor. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am the warrior. My crazy life writing the hits and rocking the MTV 80s. So, I leave you with this. Holly, you're simply the best, better than all the rest, better than anyone. So, as for me, ladies and
Thank you so
gentlemen,
much.
you're very welcome. And I'm going to see you next time.